Hello everyone! Welcome to Sunday afternoon. Bald Devil, good evening. Amy, hello as usual. Gustavo Rodriguez, hola! Let's see, this is going to take me a minute. Interesantes queer beat. Interesting. I'm going to call you Beat. Hi, Beat. Good evening. And Dottie, hello. Today we are going to be, well, I'm going to be doing what it says in the description, getting this thing ready to be molded. So you may have seen the video tutorial I did on sophisticated finishes where I painted her up. I probably have painted this sculpture about 1,000 times now. And every time I paint it, I think, I really want to cast this thing. I really want to make copies of it so I can sell copies of it. But it seemed like such a big task. However, since I'm making tutorials and I'm doing a tutorial on mold making, I thought, alright, now is the time to actually cast this thing. So the biggest process that I've been going through is analyzing where let me speak English for a moment. Where are all the holes? You can see, wherever you see brown paper through there, right? That's where one part of the mold has to sit in a bed, and one half of the mold rubber is back there and the other half is up front. And it gets kind of tricky because I have some of these holes where it kind of wraps around a bit, and so I need to be careful of that. It's possible to do more than a two-part mold. I was for a long time considering doing a three-part mold of this, but there's two reasons I decided against that. First of all, it's such another layer of complicated over the already complicated system. Let me show you something real quick. This is a printout. I found this online 10 years ago. This guy was doing this Hellboy bust, and he broke down his process with a series of pictures. And this is the very best instructions I've ever seen for a two-part matrix mold. And you can see here, it's like step one is there's your statue, there's in the clay with the base under it, you put the clay, blah blah blah. It goes through, and you see how many steps it is and how convoluted it is just for a two-part matrix mold. So imagine adding a third part to that. At that point it just gets ridiculous, and it would be a little bit too far out of my depth for me to be comfortable saying, hey, I'm going to show you guys this thing. I mean, a lot of my tutorials I'm saying, hey, I'm experimenting with this, follow at your own risk, but I actually want this mold making tutorial that I'm doing to be very useful. Like, I want to be the guy that people are printing out the image of and saying, hey, this guy showed you how to do it the best way, so I got to beat this. Which I think having it in video and in very clear steps will be the thing that beats that. So anyway, the other reason that I decided to go two-part instead of three-part was because after analyzing it from many different angles, I decided that the amount of modifications I would need to make to it to make it be only two-part as opposed to three-part were somewhat minimal. Like only several hours worth of work, and it would not compromise the design. I had a lot of little gaps and holes that were there just because there could be, because I was sculpting it with this Apoxie Sculpt, which lets you do really strong but thin hair, strands and stuff. So I had a bunch of essentially unnecessary, like you would only notice that if you were studying it from every angle, and you'd be like, oh wow, I could see through the hair at this particular angle. So wasn't quite worth it. So I've been going through the process of filling this stuff in, and that's what I'm hoping to finish up today with you guys. Oh, another design concession that I made This hair originally stopped here because it was just kind of a flyaway, and I like it that way, and it may end up that way in the final sculpt. I added this piece simply because when I pour the resin into the mold, it's going to pour down to the bottom of the head because it's upside down, and then the air will push out towards the top. And so if this hair just ended there, then it would trap a bunch of bubbles up there. So continuing the strand on allows that air to be pushed out and go all the way back up bloop, 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 to the surface. Bald Devil says, where are we all from? I'm northeast of England. In the northeast of England. Northeast, eh? Are you right up by Scotland? There's a really good industrial design school up in those parts, I believe. Do you know what it is? I can't remember what it's called. I know that Johnny Ives, the main industrial designer guy at Apple, went to a place up there, but I can't remember the name of the town. Beat is from Germany. Amy says her hair is beautiful, and she's in the Western USA. Congrats, Amy, on being on my same time schedule. Stefan, hey Stefan, welcome. Alright, here's what I'm going to do first. So, this is Apoxie Sculpt. These are both part A's. And then this should be a part B. Yes, part B. And part B in every color is this kind of greenish gray color. And part A can be all sorts of different colors. So I've got some black and some white I'm going to mix together to make gray. Alberto says, I'm far away. Am from Chile. Hi everyone. Hello Alberto. Are you north or south or middle Chile? There's a wide range of Chile to choose from. Are there penguins where you live? I guess that's the big question. These penguins are amazing. They're like, is there any other animal that can be simultaneously super impressive and like, how do you survive in that climate? How, like, you guys are so freaking tough. I cannot believe you guys survive. And with the predators they have and all that kind of, like, how do you do it? And then at the same time, just hilariously clumsy and silly. Like, they just look silly, the way they walk is silly, the way they trip over things is silly. Yeah, I can't think of any other animal that's like that. It's like simultaneously awe-inspiring and makes you laugh. Maybe me. Maybe I'm like that. Am I like a penguin? Do I impress you and make you laugh? Alberto says, in the middle, the capital, Santiago. Cool, cool. Good to know. Dave, hi Dave, says, you are like a clay god. Whoa, that's pretty impressive. And God was in all caps. Does that stand for something like geodesic, oxothermic, deity? I don't think that middle word actually meant anything, but it sounded cool, huh? Anastasia Miller is from Eastern US. Well, that's vague. There's an awful lot of East in the US. This needs a lot more white. For some reason I mixed equal parts black and white. I don't know why I did that. But it's not going to get me the gray that I need. Alberto says, I was just watching the 101 lesson, and I felt so good because I could do the first mouth. You are the best, Josh. Wow, thank you, Alberto. I appreciate that. I worked very hard on that 101 series, and the response it got has been super heartwarming and makes me very happy that I put the time and effort into it. gonna try something I have never tried before. That is in the spirit of a live demo. I am going to set aside half of this because this is both part A, so mixing it should not make it set at all. I'm just gonna stick this in the black thing, and next time I need darker gray, I'm gonna grab that. And I'm gonna assume that it's not gonna set up, and this is gonna be the first like real test. And I'm just gonna mix white into this half because I was ending up with way more than I needed. Really, if you want to make a 50% gray, you need to add about only, I don't know, 10 to 20% black to your white. In most substances. I imagine it depends on the medium, but that's been my experience with paint and epoxy. A little bit of black goes a long way. Anastasia says West Virginia to be exact. That is a beautiful part of the country. I'll bet it's very pretty now, huh? You got your leaves changing yet? Dave Proco says, I could eat all the popcorn in the world before getting enough of your 101. I'll have to put that on the box. The bottom of the poster. In the user reviews. All those things that don't exist. Okay, then you get roughly an equal amount, part B to part A. It's roughly the amount. Anastasia says, yes, beautiful autumn underway. Here in Washington State, our autumn is pretty much gray drizzle for about 3/4 of the time. And then the leaves just kind of turn brown and fall off. It's not nearly as pretty. And also, half of our trees are pine, fir trees. Non-deciduous. What are the non-deciduous ones called? There's a word that encompasses all needly trees, and I can't remember. Conifers? Whatever it is, that's what half of our trees are, and they're all kind of just dark, desaturated green. So we do not get the super beautiful color palette that you guys get over there. Dottie says, their leaves have begun to change here in southern New Hampshire. I did have kind of a surreal experience. I went to my cousin's wedding in, can't remember what the city was, but it was just outside of DC, Washington, DC. And it was in the summer, all of the trees and plant, like almost everything was identical to over here. Like the same proportion of cherry tree blossom. Must have been in the spring because the cherry blossoms were out. And like kind of ivy growing everywhere and stuff like that. It was all the same as Washington. Like I kept doing double takes saying, wait, did I actually go anywhere? Amy says, also where I'm from, it's going to be 90 degrees Fahrenheit this week. So much for fall. I feel like I would prefer the temperature in California to here, just because I have I don't know if it's circulation problems or whatever, but if it's below like the low 70s, my fingers and toes are just always cold, and it's super annoying. Okay, this stuff, safety solvent, from the same company that makes the Apoxie Sculpt. It's, I don't know what it is. It's like thick water. That's how I'll explain it, thick water. And it is super nice for smoothing this stuff down. Water also works, but it tends to leave kind of whitish stripes. Not the band Whitish Stripes, but just whitish stripes. Anastasia says it's hot here too. Cool in the evenings though. That's always nice. I like evening walks when it's been hot all day and then it just cools off. Now, see, I've got all this residue on my gloves. Some of that inevitably when I'm working with the sculpture is going to stick onto it and create unwanted texture, so I'm going to switch gloves. I know people who work with this stuff with no gloves, and the feeling on my fingers, it's the worst. Alright, so another thing I was doing was filling in areas like this where I had really deep recesses. And when the mold rubber gets in there, like the first cast or two, it's awesome. But then after a couple pulls, that kind of really thin, like feathered in edges that go way in the recesses, they'll start to tear into little chunks, and then you end up with non-optimal results. So I think I'm probably going to go in and fill in some of this area as well, just because it doesn't really buy much. The reason that I have it there originally is because it creates a nice void behind the ear, which will highlight the back of the ear, right? Because there's the shadow behind it. So that's really cool. I don't want to lose that, but I don't need it to go as far back behind the ear as it does currently. So those are the kind of little decisions I'm making. There's also, like between these two strands, there's a really deep crevice for no reason. I could fill in 80% of it and it will still give me the same like darkened effect. And so the reason is so the strands stay separated and you get that variegation in the hair. Just doesn't need to be that extreme. Oh, actually, before I do this, let me get my camera going on this, because I want to have this footage for the tutorial. I'll be going over this stuff. Guys, if just one of you became a Patreon for me for like $10,000 a month, I'd be able to hire a professional cameraman and I wouldn't have to futz around like this. So you think about that. $10,000 a month. Is that so much to ask? Anastasia says, supposed to be getting ready for a Comic-Con, but watching you instead. Well, what are you needing to get ready? Are you making a costume? Are you preparing art for it? What you doing? Dave Proco says, Denmark is like a solid freezer straight all year. Cannot recommend. I'll keep that in mind next time I'm about to go to Denmark. I used to live in the middle of Alaska, and sometime in the summer, like every once in a while, there'd be a day or two where it might get up to 90, but most summer days were in the 60s or 70s. Fahrenheit, of course. And yeah, some of the winters were quite brutal. There was one winter where it got to 70 below. That is not including wind shear. And I remember some people's tires on their cars were breaking. Like they would crack and break from being cold. Amy says, I have a love-hate relationship with California weather. I wish it was cooler, but I also don't want actual seasons. Yeah, some people love the seasons. They love the changes and how that affects their wardrobe and outdoor activities and stuff. I'm definitely, like, I love the summers here when it's mid-70s and sunny. That is awesome, and I hear that's basically most of the winter in California, so I would probably prefer it there. Hey, Nasir. You're late. That's one demerit. But you could earn it back by being early the next time. One of the really cool things I like about this medium is using a paintbrush to feather and smooth the edges into the surrounding clay. And then I almost always forget to wash my brush afterwards, and the brush is completely ruined. That is the not fun part. Dave says, gotta go. It's 10 p.m. on this side of Mother Earth. Bedtime calling. Gotta watch the recap tomorrow, and probably like 12 times. Like I said, Clay Metal God. Alright, Dave. Thanks for stopping by. And nighty-night. Dottie prefers summer. Yep, me too. Although where you're at, summer is pretty humid, isn't it? Like hot and humid. I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan for 5 years, and that's what I remember about the Midwest and East in general, is just the humidity made it miserable to go out in the summer because you'd just get sweaty almost instantly, even if it wasn't terribly hot. Amy says mid-70s and sunny is fall. Winter is more like mid-60s with occasional rain, and sometimes we get frost. Ooh, scary. Yeah, our spring and fall is usually mid-60s, and our winter is usually hovers around the 50s. We'll go between 50 and every once in a while dips to the 30s. We only get snow like every other year, and when we do, it's just a catastrophe up here because we do not have the infrastructure to deal with it. People are abandoning their cars because there's an inch of snow out. It's ridiculous. Having learned to drive in Alaska, I just kind of shake my head. I'm like, really, guys? Can't figure out how to do this? Nasir says, Josh, usually when sculpting a portrait, should we smooth the face or give it a bit of texture? I think that's just totally depending on the style you want to go for. When you're starting, you should not worry about smoothing very much because you need to be super focused on the proportions. That is what makes a portrait look like a person is reproducing their proportions. And that is something I am still learning and trying to figure out how to do. What part of California are you in, Amy? So I know San Francisco is very different than most of the rest of California as far as how cold they tend to get. Nasir says, so what's the story of the one you're working on? This one is a piece I started, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and I just keep coming back and tinkering with it more and more every couple years. Originally, I wanted it to be like Rapunzel from, you know, the fairy tale Rapunzel. And as I was doing the face, I was like, yeah, I should try to make it look like someone. So I really like, or I thought a good fit would be Jennifer Connelly from the movie Labyrinth. And so I got a bunch of reference from that movie and just spent a long time pushing the face back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And as it is now, it's like, I'll just say it was inspired by Jennifer Connelly. I don't have to claim it's a portrait of her. I started it when I was at a art and craft fair in Tacoma. I ran into a guy around here who had a store. He doesn't have it anymore, but it was in like a little affluent part of the east side of Seattle called Kirkland, and he had a little shop. He specialized in sculpting Santas, and I think he still does it. He just does it from home now. But yeah, it was just like kind of on the waterfront, little shop. I just walked in and I was like, hey, what's going on, man? This stuff's cool. And he had this little thing going on where he would have a little kind of sculpting club with friends, so he invited me to that. So I did that for a while, and then he was really active in the town art scene, whatever. Like, he was on the board of something or another. One thing led to another, and I was able to basically get free booth space at the art shows around there. So I tried to make a go of making figurines and selling them the way he did, but my stuff is just way too detailed for me to make a profit doing it that way. So it didn't work out in the long run, but I did have a lot of interesting experiences working at fairs and art shows and stuff, and it's always a big draw when someone at the booth is actually making art. So I just kind of started making this figure at some point, started making a bust, and it turned into this. That is the story. Alberto says, can you tell me the name of the music, that sound in the back? Quite cool to play it while working. Yeah, sadly, apparently no one can find it anymore. I had just have it on a physical CD. A friend of mine named Andy, who I worked with on various video games, it's his band from the late 90s. It's called Sublimation. So I wish you luck in a search to try to find it. If you do find it, let me know, because I'd love to get a link. I should just contact my friend and say, hey, this music's got to be somewhere, right? Online. And this album is named Hydralisk Den, which is unfortunate because Hydralisk, well, it's named after a video game thing. Like, the Hydralisk are the kind of alien looking dudes in the game StarCraft, and they have dens that they come out of. And so if you do a search for Hydralisk Den, you're gonna end up with a bunch of video game stuff and not this band or their album. Amy says, lives in the East Bay area. I would love to live closer to the Bay, but it's really expensive, even compared to the rest of California. Yeah. There's a lot of that going around these parts too. We have the problem of, I live on the east side of Puget Sound. So there's like Puget Sound, Seattle, and then there's a big lake, Lake Washington, and you go over that, and there's the east side where there's Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, all these various lands. And so Microsoft is over here and Nintendo is over here. But then over the last couple of years, Amazon has like moved a giant headquarters up here into downtown Seattle. And then so has, let's see, Facebook has been ramping up stuff. Some other really big company, I can't remember, some other big tech company. So basically we've got all these like super high paid people either getting jobs here or moving up here, which has obviously had a huge impact on cost of living for everyone else. I think I need to add a little hair strand under the ear there. It's getting a little too form-fitting back there. Dark Rudo. Hey, Dark Rudo. Welcome. Haven't seen your name. At least not lately. I can't recall. Nasir says, by the way, Josh, do you have any social media profiles? Instagram, Twitter, Facebook? Yeah, I put those at the bottom of all my video tutorials. I try to keep it simple. I got Facebook and Twitter basically. I tried to do what's the other one? Instagram. And I just found that keeping up with that many multiple social media accounts, it just wasn't happening. So I had to force myself to get onto Twitter. I still don't understand Twitter or why anyone is ever on it instead of Facebook. Like, I do not understand how to follow conversations. I don't understand how replying to replies, how you can follow it. Like, there's just so many things where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Let me see where it came from. And I can't. It's so frustrating. And then the character limit just bugs the snot out of me because you may or may not be able to tell, but I'm fairly big talker. Cannot remember the fancy word for that. Garrulous. I'm fairly garrulous. And so it's very frustrating to be handicapped by Twitter. There's so many things that I think are clever, funny jokes I'll post on Facebook, and then I try to also post them on Twitter, and I end up having to cut out half the words or shorten words to be ridiculous, and I'm using internet speak, using the letter U to say YOU, and I just feel like an idiot, and so I hate it. Anyway, I'm Josh Foreman on all those things. If you do a search for Josh Foreman, you should probably be able to find me. I think on Twitter I'm technically Joshua Foreman. But yeah, I'll friend anyone. I have plenty of space still on my Facebook, and Twitter is obviously unlimited to follow people. And feel free to tag me in any art that you post. I'd love to check it out. Dark Bruto says, first time I've ever made it to a live feed. Awesome. Glad you made it. Is it because the time on the other ones are just at bad times for your schedule? Or is it because you just happened to randomly come across this one? I really want to preserve this back of the ear shape here, so I piled the hair on too thick, so I'm just kind of curving it back now. Nasir says, so Josh, when do you plan on making a new sculpture? Do you decide in advance how big you want it to be, or do you just find out later? I usually have a ballpark, just a general idea, and then I don't sweat it if it ends up bigger or smaller. The size that you're going to make it definitely has an impact if you're doing an armature, like how you're going to build the armature, and the type of materials. Like Sculpey for half-size busts is just about at the limit where Sculpey makes sense. If you're doing a full-size face, Sculpey is kind of a wacky material to use for that. Not that you can't do it or it won't work, but it's just not optimal for that sort of thing. Josh Butler says, man, I gotta thank you for these videos. What I make is original and creative, but the sculpt isn't quite there. But anytime I need to know anything, I come to your vids. Learning a lot from you. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Josh. I appreciate that. That is what I strive to do, is to empower the creativity in others. That's what floats my boat. I don't know why I can't think of the euphemism that isn't also a dirty euphemism. Give me a minute and I'll think of that. I was going to say turns me on, but that's even worse. Lights me up? There you go. That's what lights me up. I was listening to a business podcast about, it's kind of aimed at people who are trying to make businesses for reasons other than just, I want to make money, which is the boat I'm in. Like, money is not my primary concern. But I want to be able to sustain what I'm doing, so it has to be a concern, right? So that's kind of where that podcast is aimed at. But one of the guests they had kept using that phrase. He would say, whatever lights you up, whatever turns you on. I was like, you should stop saying turns you on, dude. But he didn't listen. I don't know why my podcasts never listen to me. That podcast was called Story Brand, and I recommend it. Not that particular one, but just the podcast in general. Story Brand with Donald Miller. If you like podcasts and you're interested in creative business stuff, check it out. Alberto says, you are so good at the details. Yeah, that's because I think I overemphasize details because I'm not like super strong at getting the main forms and proportions down, so I compensate by working really hard on my details. Which is really just kind of spending a lot of time doing fairly mundane things over and over and over. But I like the end result, obviously. It makes me happy. Spike Sparkle, hey, welcome Spike. Says, arrived as you were speaking of the background music. May have found it on SoundClick by searching Hydralisk Den album, StarCraft Zerg. That might be it. The name of the band is Sublimation, so I don't know that that's necessarily it. But let me know if it is. Josh says, do you have the P.O. box? I'd love to send you one of my pieces as a thank you. I have a... You can always send me stuff at my office at ArenaNet. And that is... 3180... Hold on one second. That is 3180 139th Avenue... Southeast, 5th floor, Bellevue, which is spelled Bellevue, Washington, 98005. I just realized how dumb it is to just blob that out. Let me, I'll just paste it into chat. I mean, not that the address to ArenaNet is a secret, but you being able to write that down is not necessarily going to be easy. Okay, so... Amy says, hi, Spike. Thank you, Amy, for saying hi to Spike. You're awesome at saying hi to people. You know that? You're really good at that. Nasir says, how hard is it to make the same sculpture twice? Have you done it yourself? I'm talking about the traditional sculpting, not molding. Depends on the sculpture. Have I ever done... I've done multiple versions where I'm like not quite happy with the one I originally made. In general, anytime you do something a second time, you're going to be about twice as fast at it. Because a lot of time you spend making a piece of art is exploring, is putting an idea out there, analyzing it, saying yes or no, I like it or I don't, and then retracting if you don't. And I want to say that process takes up most of the time of making a new thing. And so when you're doing it the second time, I would estimate it's going to be twice as fast. Oh, actually, yeah. Okay, come to think of it, I have done. I mean, it was when I was a teenager, so it was many, many years ago, but I did handmade jewelry for the Santa Claus house in North Pole, Alaska. I made little like reindeer earrings and Santa earrings out of polymer clay. And so yeah, I was definitely doing kind of production work where I was hand copying the same thing over and over. And yeah, I feel like twice as fast is a pretty good estimation there. Uh-oh, my traditional CD is not happy. I am going to be ripping all of my CDs soon. I really need to do it soon because every time I play them, they're gonna just risk of scratching more and more. It's just, oh my gosh, I have hundreds of them. It's gonna take forever. Spike says, yeah, that's the band name. I don't know if I can post links here, otherwise I'd post it. By the way, I have to ask you not to be so dang inspirational during my off days, haha. Hey, my inspiration just flows. I have no control over it. It's like verbal diarrhea, you know? But inspirational. Amy says, I mean, saying hi to people isn't really all that difficult, but thank you nonetheless. You know what, Amy? This is the thing. When there's a group of people who don't know each other, such a simple thing is like invaluable. And the vast majority of people aren't like wired in such a way as to think, oh, I should do that, because it's just like, well, we're here, so what's the point of saying hi? But there's that social lubricant thing. I don't know. I'm not good at social stuff. I'm way better online than I am in person. I was just at a party last night, and I feel like I probably made 10 people more uncomfortable than they would have been had I not been there. So I am not one to dispense advice. I'm only here to say thank you for being a social lubricant on my channel. That is, I super appreciate it. I really do. Dark Rudo says, it is as if you have an insanely nervous disposition. You're saying you think that I have a nervous disposition? I don't feel nervous, but I have heard that from people before. I think it might have to do with the cadence of my speaking, maybe the volume of my voice, the pitch change. I don't know what it is, but there's also, I'm sure I'm also different, like when I'm not recording or being recorded. There's like a very subtle, invisible, what would that be? Like an idea that, well, a camera's on me, I have to be entertaining, quote unquote, and then that just kind of amps up what would normally be maybe more laid back emotions and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, you could be right. I could be subconsciously really nervous, but in real life, I am quite the opposite. I'm super chill, and I'm never worried, and I don't. It's funny, whenever like loud, startling sounds happen, people around me jump and look around and like have to figure out what it is, and I'm just like, eh. I don't, like, finding out what it is, I don't care. Which, I mean, would kill me if I lived in a more dangerous area, probably. Nasir says, by the way, what happened to the PVC monster you were working on? So that's my Colossus, and I finished it, and I've just been going through the process of editing the videos. And once I'm done, once that whole series is done, you know, I'll have a kind of summary video that will show the whole process like super fast in like a minute or something, and have the final beauty shots and everything. The next video will come out on the 1st, where I think, I'm not sure yet, I'm still in the process of editing it, but I think it will get to, like, the skeleton will be more or less complete on it. Nasir says Amy is cool. Yes, she is. Amy says, I wouldn't be this inviting in reality. Yeah, there's definitely that difference in virtual and real. Dark Rudo says, no, not you, Josh. You're fine as you are. Was talking to Amy. You think Amy seems nervous? Do you think she seems nervous because she's saying hi to everyone? I don't know how you would get that perception. She seems very self-assured and confident to me. But again, it's the online thing, right? Like, all I have to go by is text. I have no image. I have no tone of voice. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm just glad she's here one way or another. Jennifer7, hey, welcome. You're finally catching a stream. So glad. Jennifer says, I'll be back on Patreon soon. I swear, money is tight. Miss helping you out. Hey, don't ever feel a need to give money to me when your own money is tight. But I appreciate the sentiment, I really do. That money is not about paying the bills for me. It's about when I buy, you know, 2 webcams in 2 weeks, I don't feel like a complete idiot. Like, what? Really? Why am I doing this? That's really what it's about. And eventually all those, why am I doing this, adds up to quitting, right? That's what I guess that's what it comes down to, so. But I have enough people right now supporting me on Patreon that these cameras will be paid off within, I don't know, like 5 or 6 months. And that's fine. I'm looking for all the places that are occluded from view, which means turning the sculpture, like, if I'm looking at this point on it, I have to rotate it like this, like, and then I move my eye, scan it over slightly to this part, and then I do the same thing. So it's just, it looks like a lot of crazy wiggling, I'm sure, but there's some method to the madness. So I'm seeing a little bit of unnecessary depth right there. Hey Dane! Dane says, how many colors can you get Apoxie Sculpt in? They have pretty much the whole rainbow. You can go to aves.com and check it out. They have another product called Apoxie Clay that has just slightly different properties. And I think Apoxie Clay has fewer color options, but this Apoxie Sculpt stuff, wait, that's right. Yeah, Apoxie Sculpt has a full rainbow. Amy's saying that if someone were to have an insanely nervous disposition, it would just be difficult to say hi to everyone. Or it would be more difficult to say hi to... Yes, that's true. Imagine you would be worried about how people would perceive you and end up causing you to do nothing. Which, you know, that's what most people do on streams. That's fine. Just lurk, hang out, watch. But what I like about streams is talking to people and finding out what they're up to and sharing little bits of our lives. Nasir says, I remember my art professor telling me that I'm so perfectionist and this has a negative impact on me, so I want your opinion. How being perfectionist is bad? It's very simple. Being perfectionist is bad once perfect becomes the enemy of the good. So if you end up where you can't finish things, you can't let them go and say good enough, then you're not learning, or you're not learning as quickly as you could be if you were making a piece, getting it to where you're 90% happy with it and saying, all right, it's good enough. Like, there's this super valuable ability to recognize when a typical person who's looking at your work is going to no longer be able to tell that you put extra work into it. So for instance, with this piece, right, I feel an impulse. I want to go in and put a strand of hair, like I want to put 8 more strands of hair on this piece because it just looks kind of blah and a chunk to me. But then I have the counteracting impulse which says 99% of people who look at this would never notice that extra 20 or 30 minutes of work you put into it. And now you multiply that across the whole piece. So if I were a perfectionist, I would be like, nope, I got to do every single one of these at exactly the same density, blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, nope, I'm happy to finish it and learn stuff and move on to other things. So that's how. Amy says, the only issue I can find of being perfectionist is that you have many difficult settings. Oh, you have difficulty setting aside a piece as done. If you were to be professional or a student, that could cause problems. Yep, exactly. This is another, so you can see how kind of ugly this part is. I added this whole chunk of hair here that goes around like this and does this funny loopy curve because I know that when I lay the one half of the mold down, there's going to be a parting seam that goes across there. And if you have a seam that goes across a lot of like divoted shapes like this hair is, then sanding that and carving that down is just a huge pain. Whereas if it follows a pre-existing curve, it's very easy to just sand along the top like that. Amy says, I'm going now, lunch. See you all another time. Hey, thanks for stopping by, Amy. You are awesome. Enjoy your lunch. Jennifer says, you've definitely helped me up my game. I just finished a plague mask raccoon with spare Sculpey. Ha! I love plague masks. I would love to see that. If you could find a way to tag me on social media and let me see it, I want to see it. Dark Rudo says, Rapunzel is looking beautiful. Thank you. Did that help answer your question, Nasir? Un momento. Forgot I also want to get this seam thing into my video. That's fine. Nasir says, are you going to paint this later? Absolutely. I have painted this already about 10 times or more. And after I cast it, I'm going to feel a lot more free to be experimental with my approach. So I think I'll be able to do a better job than I have in the past with it. If you haven't seen it, I have a couple versions of the paint job on tutorial. If you look up sophisticated finishes on my channel, you should find it. Also of interest to many of you may be the fact that this hunk of hair here, if it looks different to you, the reason is because this is the first layer that I put down. Like all these other chunks are multiple layers laid over each other. So I'm going to be putting the second treatment on here that will make it be a little less kind of flat. Dottie says, I have ripped out the eyes from my sculpture at least 10 times. I'm still not happy with them, but I'll get there. I feel you, Dottie. I have done the same thing. Were you here for that stream where I was doing the Heather fairy bust? I was adding the glass eyes. I kept putting them in and ripping them out, putting them in. It's a process. Nasir says, Josh, what character in your book do you think is going to be my favorite? Just guess. I think almost everyone's favorite is going to be Scola. The little dung-eating, super smart creature that kind of latches himself onto Beaumark almost parasitically. He has a lot of character. And his motivations are very interesting too. I think that's probably a big part of what makes his character really interesting. In most fantasy books, you know, you've got your quest, you know, that a guy has to go off and, you know, defeat some evil in the land or whatever. And so we try to stay away from those kind of tropes in my book series, just to keep it more original. But I think one of the most original motivations is Scola's. Dark Rudo says, I was just admiring your Deviant art account. It's amazing. I literally only have 2 art pieces on my page. Work takes up all my valuable art time. Yes, that is an issue of our age. I hope I hope someday, as a society, we figure out a way to, you know, make people's passion be their means of support. It's really tragic, like how much creativity is squashed by the need to just make a paycheck. I'm very lucky in that my day job is also very creatively fulfilling. So it's something to work towards. Try to find a field that you think you have some kind of aptitude or skill for that will fulfill that itch a little better. Spike says, I heard that taxidermists often won't stuff pets because getting the eyes just right is so tough, but so key to capturing what an animal used to look like. Huh. That's interesting. I could see how that would be a problem because the owner would be just so specific about, I mean, I feel like it would probably be an impossible task. Like you could never get glass eyes or what, or you know, plexi, whatever the material is, to ever have that sort of soulful look that a pet would have. I remember when I used to try to make a living as an airbrush artist, I would go to rodeos and airbrush portraits of people's horses. And man, they were the most finicky about details, about getting things just right. It's funny, like it was literally easier to airbrush a portrait of someone's kid than it was to airbrush a portrait of someone's horse. Just because of how picky they were. Nasir says, I have a tendency to like evil characters. I don't know why. Yeah, that's one of the things that's really interesting about Scola, is that he's not evil, but he definitely inflicts a lot of suffering on Beaumark because he's trying to accomplish his goal. And most of the time, Beaumark is trying to figure out how to get rid of him, while begrudgingly admitting that he kind of needs him. Because he's in a strange land where he doesn't know the customs, or the politics, and all that kind of stuff, and Scola does. I have made some very awkward angles for myself to get clay into. The thing is, if I don't fill these in, then the rubber from the mold is going to seep into them all and create really awful, jaggy seams and parts that will rip in the rubber. Where a flexible brush comes in really handy. Dark Rudo says, I can't imagine getting my pet stuffed. I mean, I can understand the impulse, but yeah, I don't think I would ever actually go through with it. Seems very weird. Like, you know, getting grandma stuffed after she dies or something. That way she'll always be with us. I guess that's essentially what mummies are. Well, no, I guess it's not the same emotional impulse. It's not because their families want them to hang out with them all the time, like it is with pets. Jennifer says, is this the Jennifer Connelly statue from the other video? Looks really similar. It is exactly that sculpture, in fact. I'm adjusting her, making some modifications so that I can mold her for my molding and casting video series that I'm doing soon. Something I've always wanted to do with this sculpture, never got around to, and now I have the perfect excuse for doing so. So after going through all that trouble of figuring out the perfect paint job for her, I just went and spray painted over her once again. Dottie asks, do you prefer sculpting realistic portraits or more fantasy characters? I definitely tend towards the fantastic. It's maybe a bit of a cop-out in the fact that, like, once you add fantasy elements, you've removed yourself from certain kinds of criticism about realism and stuff. I try not to let that affect me, like the amount of dedication I have to making something good, though. Like, that's why my constant refrain is, like, use reference for everything. Always, you know, no matter how fantastical your thing is, it should have some kind of reference to something that people can recognize, because that'll just make it resonate with people better. But yeah, I just like fantasy. I was raised on fantasy. My parents read me fantasy books growing up, and I've always liked fantasy movies. Alberto says, which one has been the best sculpture of yours, or the one you love the most? I guess the one I think is probably the best and I love the most is the Colossus that I recently finished. I think going through the process of recording the entire creation of it, so I get to relive all the mistakes that I made and all the breakthroughs that I had. I just really appreciate that piece, and it's just massive and awe-inspiring in person. I can't wait to share it with everyone. But I gotta get through, like, I don't want to show it off before I've had the whole making of series out. Jennifer says, I didn't know you could bake a statue and then reclay her and then bake her again. I just never thought about it. Yep, that's totally a thing. Although in this case, this is not Super Sculpey. This is Apoxie Sculpt, which you don't bake. It just sets up in a couple hours. I've been working with this batch for about an hour, and it's starting to get to the point where it's a little too stiff to work with well. See, when I roll it, once it gets to the point where it's like getting harder to roll and starts getting crumbly when you try to bend it and stuff, that's where I try to call it quits for that layer, that batch. Dark Rudo says, personally, I prefer to remember my loved ones living and happy, but I respect people's differences. Yes, me too. Spike says, funny how our perceptions on death change over the years. At the advent of modern photography, people could take a family portrait with their recently deceased relative for posterity. Huh. That's interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen those photos. They sound like they're probably very creepy. Spike says, they dress them up in fancy clothes and makeup. They look more like they're sleeping than in the throes of death. Yeah, that does sound still very creepy. Nasir says, I feel like I'm bothering you with all the book-related questions, but I'm genuinely so excited. Hey, Nasir, do not ever feel like you're bothering me with anything, but especially not talking about my book, because I'm super excited about my book. I would love to talk about it nonstop, so thank you for asking the questions. It's very encouraging. Yeah, see, this is getting too crumbly for comfort, but I really need to get something on this piece that is more that adds more dimension to it. Like, that is just like one flat ribbon, and I want something that sticks out a little more. The longer the clay has been mixed and the more it's setting up and crumblier, the more you kind of need to use this the epoxy solvent, safety solvent, to smooth it. Slam Pasta. Hey, welcome, Slam Pasta. Says, is epoxy much cheaper than Super Sculpey? I'd like a cheaper middle ground between wet clay and polymer. Is it cheaper? I want to say that this container, and it comes with a side B that's the equal size, is about 30 bucks. But I mean, it's pretty hefty. I'd say it's probably a bit cheaper overall. And it's got its you know, pros and cons when it comes to like how you sculpt with it and the type of thing you sculpt. Like, I would not sculpt a face with it. Well, I haven't yet, because I need the time to be able to go back and forth and spend a day thinking about it and come back fresh. So I always use Sculpey for faces. But this stuff, yeah, obviously it's great for hair and fur and clothes and stuff where you're just kind of doing one kind of patch at a time. And then the fact that it sets up as hard as stone means you never have to worry about mushing it when you're doing other parts of your sculpt. Dane says, Josh, do you smooth the epoxy with water? You can, but I'm using safety solvent, which I prefer. It's just smooths it a lot better. It's got a slightly oily, so it's like thicker water, and it smooths better. Water can sometimes leave streaks, like these white foamy streaks in the material. Spike says, if you Google Victorian post-death photography, you'll see examples, but it is indeed a bit unsettling. You know, now that you mention it, I think I may have seen some of those pictures. I mean, I'm sure they're used in haunted houses and stuff like that. Alright, so I've got this big huge amount left over, which is fine because I need a larger amount to do this pour spout on the bottom. You don't technically need to make this nice and smooth, it just makes the overall piece nicer to cast and mold. Spike says, ripe fodder for haunted houses and scary movies. Yep. I'm pretty sure I've seen a picture of a family with like their dead baby. You know, all dressed up in its pretty Victorian garb. Very sad. D-Flow Sounds. How's it going, D-Flow? Nasir says, Josh, what's your favorite book's fantasy world? Lord of the Rings, or Game of Thrones, or Harry Potter, etc.? That's tough. I definitely have nostalgia for, like, Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia. So my problem is that, like, Lord of the Rings has been so borrowed from at this point that it's almost boring to me now, which is ridiculous and obviously disrespectful to the guy who worked so hard to make it. And it's kind of a sad phenomenon that can happen. It's kind of like I love Monty Python, but the more I hear people quote it over and over and over, the less funny it gets, you know what I mean? And so it's probably that kind of phenomenon. So I would probably go for something a little more recently created. I think I might want to go with the Stormlight Archives world by Brandon Sanderson, his Stormlight Archives book series. That world, so I'm super into world building, obviously, and the fact that the premise of the world is something original. It's that these massive hurricane type storms blow across the entire surface of the world every couple days or whatever, maybe every week or so. And how, I mean, he thought through really carefully, like, how does that affect architecture and city planning and you know, culture and all this kind of stuff. So that is the kind of stuff that really excites me about world building. And yeah, that's the biggest one that comes to mind. I love Harry Potter. I've actually never read the books, and I probably won't ever, because I just want to love the movies as much as I love them now. And when you read the book, you inevitably, when you watch the movies, then you're like, ah, why didn't they show that? Ah, why did they change that? And so there's that kind of noise in the back of your head that keeps you from just enjoying. I'm sure that happens too with Game of Thrones for people. But yeah, so, and while I love Harry Potter, I don't think the world building is particularly good. It's entertaining, but it's always contradicting itself. There's just tons of Deus Ex Machina going on in the story. It's like, oh, suddenly we find out that this thing will do whatever, and that just happens to be the thing that has to happen to save the day. And maybe it's set up better in the books. Geflo says, going well, had a long night that started at a bar at 7 p.m., turned into karaoke, and ended with running into an old friend on the subway at 4:30 a.m. Wow, sounds epic. Holy Pinor says, I finally caught one of your streams. Hello, Holy. I'm glad you did. Welcome. Slam Pasta says, Discworld, the best. I've heard that from a lot of people. Have I read a I think I've read a Discworld book. I've certainly seen a couple of the movies, like The Hogfather, and what was another one? Yeah, my mom keeps trying to get me to read either Going Postal or Thump. Right, those are from that series, Discworld series. Donna Durham says, hi Josh, stumbled across your videos the other day and I'm hooked. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful talent with us. I'm still new to polymer clay and need all the help I can find. Awesome, Donna. I'm so glad you found it. So glad you found us and stumbled onto the stream. I'm always happy to answer any questions you have, too. Amy's back. How was your lunch? Hold on, don't tell me. I'm going to guess what you had. Tuna fish sandwich on wheat. Am I right? Spike says, thank goodness, Amy. Saying hi to people is too much pressure, and I'm up and down, so I can't do it consistently. Whew. Yeah, we almost had a catastrophe there. Our bench warming hire was not pulling his weight, apparently. Nasir says, so when you say you love world designing, does that mean you designed a world map for your book? Oh, it is much more than that, Nasir. It's everything, like from the geology to the biology to the astronomy, like where is this planet located in its system and what are the ramifications of that? How big is the moon? How does that affect the tides? Can a city be built here? You know, is the water fresh or brackish or salt? And why would that be? And how did these animals come to be here? And what ecological niche do they fill? And how did this language evolve? And how does that affect the naming of things? And it just goes on and on forever. So the process of world building for me is kind of making a bunch of placeholders and saying, well, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I just don't know. I've done a lot of studying in a lot of fields, but there's no way I could know all this stuff. What I'm hoping is that I find various experts who are knowledgeable in their fields who want to read my stuff and vet it and say, you know, oh, this creature couldn't exist because the amount of tensile strength on the limbs with that amount of weight would break the limbs, or it would like break into the ground because of the, you know, there's so many things. I'm trying to make it all scientifically plausible, which is a huge challenge that most world builders don't give themselves. Most world builders are concerned with how do the rules of the world stay consistent and affect the story. But I'm not taking that approach. I'm saying, how do I make this world actually plausible? And then I want writers and artists and other people to come in and work within that sandbox that I've worked for 20 years to build. That's the big dream. Donna says, got an alert in my email as I put you on the always list when I subscribe to your channel. Awesome. Thanks for doing that, Donna. Jennifer says, I have a friend who does world building, but for D&D, he's just as detailed as you. It's definitely a full-time job within itself. Yep, it can easily spiral out of control. I had a dungeon master named Jeff Grubb who actually worked on a lot of the world building for Dungeons and Dragons. I think he was mostly working in version like 2 or something. It was back in the probably 80s and 90s, but like he invented a huge number of the various monsters and creatures and cities and stuff like that. So it was really fun having him as a dungeon master because, you know, he's obviously very familiar with the material. Amy says, no one here passed mind reading 101? I need to find the YouTube channel for mind reading 101 so I can know what you had for lunch. Dane says, do you sell your sculptures? If you do, how do you find out a price for your work? I find it hard to set a price on my sculpture work, time, material, and so on. Yeah, that's a big topic. I'm almost ready to have my official website up and running, and that will have some sculptures for sale. And I'm just like very gut estimating for prices. The way I'm doing it is on kind of an opportunity cost basis, because like I make a good enough living without selling sculptures. I don't, you know, I don't have to worry about making a good profit. All I'm worried about is the amount of time it takes me to cast and paint stuff that I've already molded. So I'm not even taking into account the, you know, hundreds of hours I've spent on a sculpture, blah, blah, blah. If I was trying to make a profession of it, I would try to calculate that stuff and say, what is a reasonable amount of money per hour? When I tried selling sculptures before, like one-of-a-kind sculptures, I was finding that I could never get over like $5 an hour for my work, and it was just like, well, might as well work at McDonald's at that point. So yeah, the more you track that stuff, the better decisions you can make. Like for my Colossus video, you know, I had that timer set up, and you know, let me know it took 500 and something hours for me to make it. And so if you are making stuff to cast, then just have a timer going whenever you're working on it, and then you can break that down. You know, cast one and paint it, and then cast another one and paint it, and time how long it takes you to do the second or even the third one. And then you'll have a pretty good idea, like, okay, I spent, you know, 100 hours on the sculpture, the original sculpture. It took me, you know, 5 hours to mold and cast it. It takes me 4 hours to cast it and paint it, and then you just kind of add that all up and divide it by hour and see what you're comfortable with. That's how I'd approach it. Spike says, you can ask my ex. I certainly did not pass even the entry-level course. Oh, of Mind Reading 101? Nasir says, you can't apply our bio rules on fantasy creatures. Well, you can if you're not having magic in your world. If you have magic, then you have a lot more freedom. I don't actually have magic in my world. Mine is much like the aesthetic is fantasy, but the actual mechanics behind everything are science fiction. So like the history is a science fiction one, and the creature anatomy and all that kind of stuff is science fiction. It's just never portrayed as science fiction. It doesn't have the tropes of science fiction. There aren't like robots and laser beams and spaceships and star bases and out of control AI and all that kind of stuff. It's got the tropes of fantasy. It's got giant creatures and epic castles and you know, martial combat with swords and spears and stuff. Slam says, I've been wanting to DM for a long time because I have that itch to create a consistent world for my group. That went out the window when I found the T-Rex in the monster manual. Yeah, there's only so much you can do within the confines of a pre-built world when it comes to world building. I mean, unless you heavily edit it and just decide, you know, you're going to ignore some portion of it. Spike says, thinking about the D&D group this channel would make. Exciting. Oh man, what would you be, Spike? What's your class and race? When I played, I was a rock gnome thief of some sort. Can't remember the specifics. I was an artificer, so I would build little mechanical animals that had combat things. Like I had a bat that could squirt oil and then drop little sparks so it can light monsters on fire and stuff. And I had some kind of little, what was it? Like some little walking thing. I can't remember if it was a turtle or a mouse or something that I could get under doors. Slam Pasta says, Roll20 and Tabletop Simulator, make that achievable. Oh, getting a D&D group? Yeah, online one. Alberto, hi Alberto, says, the female hair is so hard to do, for me at least. How do you decide the way you'll make it flow? I think like most sculptural things, you block out in very simple forms first, and then you just kind of start adding to that. So in my case, I knew I wanted to spiral all the way around, so it was pretty simple to just, in general, hair goes down, and what is this? Let's see. Clockwise from this direction. So it was just a matter of laying in a piece, letting that set up, and then laying in more and more delicate pieces around it as I went. So at this point, I could go in and start doing some more details. I could mix up another batch of clay, but I'm afraid that I would absentmindedly stick my thumb there and like squash the parts that I've already done. So I'm gonna call it for today. I'm gonna go back to editing the Colossus video for the first, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. I'm gonna stick in the chat for about 5 minutes and answer any follow-up questions you guys have. Yeah, so have a great day. Thanks for joining, everyone. See you next time.